Are you looking to step up your video shooting skills? Well, in this video, I'm going to walk through 10 DSLR video shooting tips. I'm Amanda Horvath, and I'm all about helping business owners and entrepreneurs leverage the power of video without breaking the bank or taking up tons of time. If you're looking to use video marketing in your strategy this year, then be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified every time I release a new video. When you're first starting in video, it can feel very overwhelming and even impossible to capture great shots. The following 10 tips are going to kickstart your journey to becoming a great videographer or just knowing how to capture great B-roll for your business. Be sure to stick around to the end to hear all 10 tips because these truly will do wonders to upping the production value of the videos that you produce. Tip number 1, add motion. This might seem obvious for those that have been doing video for a while, but when you're first starting off, you don't really think about motion. If you look to the top of the cinematographers, they're always wanting to do dolly push-ins, which is when the camera's on a track and they're moving closer to the subject, or they have something called a slider that the camera sits on and it moves from left to right or forward and backward. And these movements really add a lot to the shot. So you'd like to kind of recreate these when you're shooting your videos as well. And you don't have to have a dolly or a slider to be able to do this, but just move slightly from left to right and you want to try to stay stable or push in on your subject. And one way to do this, if you're say you want to push in on a subject and have it come into focus, instead of having to push in and get the focus perfect, start with it in focus and then move backwards. And then in editing, you can reverse that. So you can see how motion can really add a lot to your shot. Tip number 2, depth of field. This refers to shallow focus. So now that you have a DSLR, you can accomplish this look very easily. All you have to do is stop down on your camera. That means the aperture goes down to a lower number. So it might go to 2.8 or 1.8, depending on what your lens will go to. When you do this, you're going to achieve that really nice look where the foreground is in focus and the background is out of focus or vice versa. This is really the basis of cinematic shots. So the more shallow focus you can do, the better. I'll give you a tip. I rarely take my camera off 2.8 because I really love that shallow focus. So if you love it too, then go ahead and stick at 2.8 or whatever the lowest f-stop or aperture that your camera can go to. Stay there and you're gonna get some great shots. Tip number 3, choose a color profile. Now that you have a DSLR, you have the value of color profiles. So your camera has several different settings that you get to choose from. And while at first it might seem great to use that really poppy, oversaturated profile, that's actually the opposite of what you want to do. So you want to find the one that's the most flat, which means there's no color, no contrast, or as little as possible, so that when you do get into editing, you get to control what you want to pop out on your image. I can tell you on my GH5, I don't like to use the absolute flattest profile because I don't think it actually looks that good when I get it onto the computer. So I use one called Profile, which does have a little bit more saturation and contrast to start. So it's not crazy oversaturated, and I get to control what I want the image to look like in the end. So go ahead, play around with several different profiles on your camera, and you'll eventually find one that you really like. Tip number 4, white balance. White balance is super important because it can really make your image look weird if you don't set it properly. So the basics of white balance is that if you are outside, daylight comes in at 5,600 Kelvin, and if you're inside under tungsten light, that comes in at 3,200 Kelvin. So sometimes you'll have mixed light and you fall between those two, but overall, you're gonna get to know this as you start playing around with the settings on your camera. So don't underestimate the value of setting your white balance. If you just do automatic white balance, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it can switch halfway through your shoot. And then when you get into color correcting your footage, that can be very frustrating because this clip looks different than this clip. So overall, as much as possible, you want to be setting your white balance. Tip number 5, angles. Don't underestimate the value of angles. Try to capture a variety of angles, from below, from above, from the side, and look at this as an opportunity to tell a story from multiple viewpoints. So capture the same image from several different angles to where you can either cut all those together into a sequence, or you could just choose the best one that fits your edit once you're actually editing the footage. Tip number 6, variety of shots. So if you're shooting some sort of action sequence, then you'll want to capture that from several different shots rather than just one continuous shot. This allows you to do faster edits, and it's going to make for a lot more interesting of a story because we're getting closer to someone rather than just being wide, or we're getting to see the full picture by seeing the wide angle versus just being close up. Tip number 6, focus. You need to decide when it is best to shoot with manual focus or autofocus. Manual focus can often be best with video because you have more control over what you're capturing. Autofocus can be frustrating because if you nail the movement perfectly, but then the autofocus kind of messes up, it ruins your shot. So more often than not, in fact, 95% of the time, I am shooting in manual focus. You're gonna find what works best for you, but keep that in mind as you start to learn your camera. Tip number 8, stabilization. Adding a stabilizer to your gear set can really make your footage look 100 times better. This adds a lot more variety to the different shots that you can get instead of having to handhold your camera and worrying about the shakiness when you're walking around. This was one of the first items that I bought when I was first investing in gear, and it immediately upped the production quality, and I was able to charge a lot more by just having that stabilizer. Tip number 9, consider text. If you're looking to add text to your videos, then you're going to want to shoot in a way that adds a blank space for text to go and fill in that spot. If you're only going to add text after the fact, you don't think about adding it before you shoot the video, then it can be really difficult to make that text look good on screen. So if you're planning to add text to your videos, think about it. Leave some blank space. And finally, tip number 10, slow motion. Your DSLR likely has the option to shoot in 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. This allows you to capture more frames per second to where when you slow it down and play it back at 24 frames per second, it is in slow motion. 60 frames per second is a little faster than 120 frames per second, but either way, just shoot in slow motion. I'm telling you, it looks amazing. My brother and I always joke that shooting in slow motion is basically cheating because everything looks good in slow motion. It's also amazing for making your shots look a lot more stable if you're shooting handheld because it's slowing down the jerkiness of your footage. So if you don't have a stabilizer, that's one way to overcome that issue. So whenever possible, shoot in slow motion. Now that you have these skills, go ahead and apply them. And if you'd like to continue watching videos, then go ahead and watch one of these two here. I'll see you in the next video.